In 1979, a teenage girl accepts a babysitting job at an isolated home in the Minnesota woods. After putting the children to bed, she settles on the couch to watch TV, only to be startled by a phone call. She picks it up and hears heavy breathing, when suddenly a man's unsettling voice asks, "Have you checked on the children?" Nervous, she dismisses it as a prank and hangs up. 15 minutes later, the phone rings again. This time the voice asks, "Why haven't you checked on the children?" Panic sets in and she calls 911. The operator advises her to keep the caller on the line if they call back, allowing the call to be traced. Moments later, the phone rings again, and the voice snarls, "Check on the children now." Trembling, she keeps the call connected as instructed. Once more the phone rings. The operator's voice crackles through, urgent and frantic. "Get out of the house. The calls are coming from upstairs." Terrified but worried about the children, she hesitates before fleeing outside. She bolted out of the house, her heart pounding in her chest. There, a tall man stepped out of the shadows, his presence looming as he stared her down with a chilling intensity, and he asked in a cold, menacing voice, "Why didn't you check on the children?"
This teenager killed his dad, and a year later he killed his mom, and he might have just gotten away with it. This is Colin Griffith. His parents were Charles and Catherine, and he also has an older adult brother. In 2020, Colin's parents divorced. His mother, Catherine, moved to Florida, but Colin stayed with his father, Charles, in Oklahoma. And to say that the custody battle for Colin was messy would be a massive understatement. In August of 2020, Catherine filed for full custody of Colin, claiming that her ex-husband was abusive. He had been abusive towards her for their entire 20 years of marriage, and now he was abusing their son, Colin. She claimed that Colin's father could not accept that his son liked boys. He was actually really furious about it, so he was kind of keeping his own son hostage, captive in his own home. He wasn't allowed to go to school, he wasn't allowed to leave the house, he wasn't allowed to talk to anyone, do anything. He was being completely isolated just because he liked boys. Colin wasn't even allowed to talk to his own mother on the phone, and Catherine would also claim that her ex-husband Charles was stalking and harassing her. But Colin's dad, Charles, told a completely different story. He said that none of that is true, that his ex-wife Catherine was mentally unstable and abusing substances and alcohol. He also claimed that his ex-wife Catherine was trying to impersonate as a male online and trying to catfish their son on Discord to try and convince him to run away from his dad's house. So this is obviously clearly a very messy custody battle, and this custody battle would end, but not in the way that anyone thought it would. On February 14th, 2023, Colin called 911 to report that he had just shot and killed his father. 15-year-old Colin Griffith claimed that his father came at him with a sharp weapon, like he was trying to kill him, so Colin felt like he had to shoot his father and kill him. He shot him in the head and he shot him in the chest. He obviously claimed that this was self-defense, but at only 15 years old, Colin was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of his father, Charles. The evidence at the scene did not line up with Colin's story of self-defense, but about a month later, the investigators decided that there wasn't enough evidence to disprove Colin's story, so all the charges were dropped, and he was sent to go live with his mother in Florida. But only 7 months after killing his father, more red flags would pop up in Colin's life. Colin told staff at his new school that his mom got so mad at him that she pulled a weapon on him. So the police were obviously called, and Colin's mom, Catherine, denied everything. She said that her son was just mad at her, trying to get back at her because she had just taken his phone and AirPods away. This is a serious issue, but Catherine did try to kind of make excuses for her son, even though he tried to get her thrown in jail over headphones. She claimed that her son Colin was suffering a PTSD after years of abuse at the hands of his father, and also that Colin was detached from reality a little bit. So Colin was involuntarily admitted into a mental health facility, and he was kept at a facility for several months, where Colin told the staff if they put him back in the custody of his mother that he would kill her. He actually said, "I've done it before, I can do it again." Regardless, Colin was soon released and he was put back in the custody of his mother, but only about a month later, the police would be called again. Catherine was trying to limit the amount of time that Colin was playing video games, and this made him so mad that Colin knocked his mother to the ground and started stomping on her. And when police arrived, Colin claimed that he did that out of self-defense. This time there was a witness. It wasn't a he said, she said. Colin's grandmother was there, witnessed the entire thing, and said that it was not self-defense. So Colin was arrested. He was momentarily placed in the custody of DCF, and again he told them if they put him back in the custody of his mother that he was going to kill her. But once again, Colin was put back in his mother's custody. A few months later, Colin graduated high school, and his mom, Catherine, tried to reward him by buying him a brand new, really nice car. She also took Colin on vacation that summer. I think she was kind of trying to buy his love a little bit. But only a few months later, in September of 2024, so really not that long ago, Colin tried to run away to his grandmother's house. But his grandmother's house was in a different county, which was against his probation. So a couple days later, his mom, Catherine, tried to go pick him up to kind of stop him from getting in trouble. So on September 8th, 2024, Catherine drove to go pick up her son at his grandmother's house because she did not want her son to get in trouble for breaking his probation. And that was around 4 p.m. But around 6 p.m., so only 2 hours later, Colin called 911 to report that him and his mom had gotten in a really, really big fight, and his mother had accidentally fallen on a sharp weapon and was dead. When the police arrived, Colin was already standing outside. He was covered in blood, and he told the police that he knew his rights and he wanted a lawyer. He did not seem upset. He did not seem sad. He did not seem mad. He did not seem stressed out. He did not seem frantic. He did not seem concerned for his mom. He was just calm. And inside the home, 39-year-old Catherine was tragically gone. She had been stabbed in the neck with so much force that the sharp kitchen instrument had come out the other side of her neck. And 17-year-old Colin, only 18 months after shooting his father, was arrested for the murder of his mother. He was being charged and tried as an adult, and if convicted, he was facing life in prison. During Colin's trial, Colin changed his defense strategy. Instead of claiming that his mom fell on the weapon, because obviously that did not happen, Colin claimed that he killed his mother out of self-defense. And if you're thinking, well, no jury would ever believe that, what a coincidence, he has to kill both of his parents in self-defense within a year of each other. Well, the jury were not allowed to be made aware that Colin had killed his father like a year and a half before he killed his mother, because it was not relevant because he was never convicted of a crime. And just yesterday, on February 5th, 2025, Colin Griffith was found not guilty for the murder of his mother, Catherine. So he has been released after possibly getting away with murdering 2 people, the people that are supposed to be the most important people in his life. Personally, that's really scary for me, and I would be really scared for anyone that has any kind of relationship with this person in the future. A lot of people believe that Colin is a psychopath, but I couldn't find any official diagnosis for that. Also, there's been a lot of talk about reopening his father's case, but I couldn't find any official update about that. Really interested to get your thoughts on this case. I've been wanting to cover it forever. I've been following it since September, but I wanted to wait till the trial finished up. So definitely leave me all your thoughts in the comments. Really interested to keep commenting back with you guys and discussing this case. Do you think that Colin got away with murdering his parents, both of them? Or do you think that both of his parents were just really toxic, violent people, and his story of events is true? Do you think that one of them was in self-defense and maybe the other one wasn't? Let me know all your thoughts, theories in the comment section when you're there. Please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And until then, I'll see you guys in my next video.
I will die on the hill that this man did not end his own life. In April of 2003, Colonel Philip Michael Shue kissed his wife goodbye, left for work, and 2 hours later was killed in a violent car accident. But this wasn't a typical car accident because he had been severely mutilated prior to his crash. Both of his nipples had been surgically removed, as well as a portion of his ear and pinky. Yet authorities quickly ruled his death a suicide. The circumstances surrounding this case and the details leading up to Philip's death are genuinely horrifying, so let's talk about it. Colonel Philip Michael Shue was a really intelligent man who eventually entered the United States Air Force and became a well-regarded psychiatrist. In 1988, Philip was stationed at the Eglin Air Force Base in Florida when he met his future wife, Tracy, who was an Air Force nurse at the base. At the time, Philip was going through a nasty divorce from his first wife, Nancy, and although he didn't talk much about her, he did say that there was just no love in that relationship. So needless to say, when the divorce was finalized in 1993, he was really excited, and it was at this point that he and Tracy decided to get married. Fast forward to 5 years later. In 1998, Philip was reassigned to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. But in April of 2003, Philip decided that it was time to retire from the Air Force. He planned to finish up some last-minute work, and by September, the two would move to Birmingham, Alabama to their dream home. They had just put down the deposit to secure the house, and they were so excited. But on the morning of April 16th, 2003, a series of mysterious events would occur that would change their lives forever. The morning started out just like any other. Philip got dressed in his military fatigues and brought Tracy her routine cup of coffee in bed. Philip said that he had to get to work a little earlier than usual to finish up some paperwork, so at 5:30 a.m., he kissed his wife goodbye, told her he loved her, and headed out for work. But 2 hours came and went, and he never made it into his office, which was only 30 miles away, and nobody would know what happened to him until they found his crashed car, with him deceased inside of it. At around 8:14 that morning, 2 witnesses saw Philip's tan Mercury Tracer swerve onto the median of Interstate 10 just outside of San Antonio. His car then drove for about 1,500 feet, going about 60 miles per hour, and at one point he even became airborne, before slamming back down onto the highway. Philip was then seen driving safely for several miles before veering off the side of the road, crashing into a cluster of oak trees. When authorities arrived on scene, they found Philip dressed in his military fatigues. His car was completely caved in on the driver's side, and he suffered massive head injuries, and he appeared to have died on impact. But this is where things start to get really strange. Philip had no wallet or ID on him, and upon looking closer, authorities found that his body had been severely mutilated prior to the crash. The t-shirt Philip was wearing under his military clothes had been cut open from his chest to his belly button, and under that was a 6-inch vertical gash on his chest. Both of his nipples had been surgically removed, and not only that, but his left pinky and part of his earlobe had been amputated, and all of those body parts were never found. Authorities then found that both of Philip's wrists and his boots had been wrapped in duct tape, as if he had been bound at one point but broken loose. So Philip was found dead at around 8:30 in the morning, but his wife Tracy wasn't actually notified about his death until 7 hours later, when the sheriff and a minister arrived at her home. And when they did notify her, they conveniently left out the part where her husband had been mutilated. It wasn't until a worker with the Department of Public Safety arrived at her home a few hours later that Tracy noticed something wasn't quite right. The worker blurted something out that made Tracy stop in her tracks. He said, quote, "Oh, by the way, is there any reason your husband would have duct tape around his wrists and ankles?" End quote. And that's when Tracy remembered something that would turn this investigation upside down. In the years prior to his death, Philip began receiving a series of letters warning him that his life may be in danger. In the letters, an unknown person writes to Philip stating that a friend of theirs overheard Philip's ex-wife Nancy and her current husband wishing he was dead so that they could collect on his life insurance. To kind of back up, as part of Philip and Nancy's divorce settlement, Nancy had received the right to own his life insurance policies, which totaled $1 million. Over the years following the divorce, Philip begged Nancy to cancel the policies, but she would always tell him no and that she just couldn't afford to. So once he received these letters, Philip actually wrote to Nancy and confronted her about the warnings, but she of course denied any involvement, and she said she had no clue what he was talking about. According to Tracy, these letters really scared Philip, and after each letter he became more and more scared for his life. He gave these letters to his superiors in the Air Force, but they concluded that they didn't actually hold any harm or danger and told him to basically just ignore them. He even reached out to the insurance companies, which were USAA and Northwestern Mutual, and asked them to cancel the policies. But they always responded that since Nancy was the owner of the policies, she had total authority over them. But like I said, Philip was terrified for his life, and he even started experiencing panic attacks. So he eventually wrote a letter to the insurance companies and said, quote, "Thoroughly examine my death for evidence of foul play, even if on the surface the cause would appear natural or accidental." End quote. But despite all of this pleading, the insurance companies still refused to cancel the policies. So when asked if there would be any reason why Philip's wrists and ankles may have been wrapped in duct tape, Tracy's first thought was the threatening letters and handed them over to the police. She let them search the property for clues and hoped that in doing so, something would come of it. But unfortunately, it didn't. But get this, it wasn't even until a month after Philip's funeral that Tracy learned he had been mutilated. And the only reason she found out was because a reporter somehow found out and asked her about it. But after learning this information, it reassured Tracy that Philip didn't die accidentally. He was murdered, and it was somehow connected to those letters. During the investigation, an autopsy was conducted by the Bexar County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Vincent DeMaio, and his findings only bring more questions. A small amount of white fiber material consistent with that of a diaper was found on Philip's groin area. Also found in that same area was a little tab with a cartoon figure of a sun and moon, which is also consistent with a tab from a diaper. But Philip obviously didn't wear diapers, and nowhere in the car was a diaper found. So how that material got on him is still a mystery. A high concentration of lidocaine, which is an anesthetic, was found found in Philip's blood, and originally it was thought to have come from a cream that would be rubbed onto the skin. However, there is usually another ingredient in that cream that would also show in the toxicology, but it didn't. So somehow prior to his death, Philip was injected with lidocaine. But despite all of that, after 1 year of investigating, the local and state police and the Air Force all concluded that Philip ended his own life. They labeled Philip's death a suicide, more specifically a bizarre psychological breakdown. The medical examiner officially ruled that despite the odd mutilations on Philip's body, there were no wounds identified as being consistent with a struggle. He, along with the Air Force and state police, believe 100% that the injuries found on Philip's chest were self-inflicted. One of the reasons they feel this way is because Philip reportedly didn't try calling for help that day. Philip's phone was found in the car at the scene of the crash, but according to phone records, he never actually made a call on his phone after the mutilation. This narrative was really pushed that there was no evidence that he tried to call for help, but that's not entirely true. After the crash, and for reasons unknown, Philip's phone was given to his and Tracy's neighbor before being given back to her. And according to them, there was a large amount of blood on the inside of the phone, almost as if he had held the phone up to his partially amputated ear and tried to call for help. What is odd that I think should be pointed out is that the exact location that Philip was driving before he crashed was technically away from help. He was driving away from San Antonio and a few hospitals and police stations, and he actually passed a state trooper on the highway. Philip also passed 3 exits to his home in Bernie, and why he didn't stop, no one knows. Authorities believe that he injected himself with lidocaine to avoid feeling the pain of mutilating his own body. According to them, hesitation marks were found next to the gaping wound on Philip's chest, which to them indicate that the injuries were self-inflicted. But Tracy and even Philip's commanding officer believe that he did not end his own life, and instead was abducted and tortured, and that he accidentally crashed the car, which resulted in his death when trying to escape. 2 months after Philip's death, Tracy filed a civil lawsuit against Nancy and the 2 insurance companies in hopes of preventing Nancy from being able to collect on Philip's $1 million life insurance payout. Nancy has denied any involvement in Philip's death, and although she did refuse to take a polygraph test, she told authorities that on the day of Philip's death, she and her current husband could prove that they were at work in Florida. It wasn't made public if this was ever confirmed, but I have to assume it was. One thing that I wanted to note is that Tracy believes that the nature of Philip's injuries could be a clue. His injuries could be classified as sexual in nature, and court documents show that Nancy was a board-certified sex therapist who also studied the practice of sadomasochism. Tracy has gone on record saying Philip never had any sort of fetish like this, but I just wanted to mention this because it will pop up when you research this case. Because of how many people pushed to have Philip's death reinvestigated, his case was actually brought to a jury of 12 people. But given the evidence, they all concluded that the suicide ruling should stand. But Tracy still didn't believe this, so she went on to hire an independent forensic pathologist to complete a second autopsy with fresh eyes. And after investigating the case, they concluded that the evidence presented in the initial autopsy does not support suicide, but rather it's suggestive that another person may have been involved in Philip's death. They noted that there were no fingerprints on any of the duct tape found on Philip, which indicates that another person was involved. They also brought up the fact that no cutting instrument was found in the car that was responsible for Philip's injuries. Additionally, Philip's wallet and ID, his nipples, his left pinky, and part of his earlobe were never found, leading the pathologist to believe that this trauma occurred somewhere outside of the vehicle and that another person caused it. What's extremely odd is that this pathologist found no record logged by the original medical examiner of there being an injection site anywhere on Philip's body. The lidocaine would have had to be injected into each nipple and in the middle of his chest, but the original medical examiner didn't identify any of that. And although there was a high concentration of lidocaine found in his blood, it wasn't high enough to numb himself from the pain, which almost disproves the theory that Philip numbed himself before mutilating his own body. 2 years after Philip's death, the military issued a 20-page report and called it a psychological autopsy. In it, they basically just reiterate all of the findings from the previous investigation into the case. Their conclusion was that Philip had become paranoid, depressed, and irrational in the months leading up to his death, and they all agreed that his death should still be labeled a suicide. They also cited that there was no evidence of another person being involved, but there is one person that disagrees with this finding, someone very important, and that is Philip's own psychiatrist. Like I mentioned earlier, once Philip began receiving those warning letters, he became scared for his life and developed major anxiety as a result. So he started seeing a psychiatrist for treatment. In his psychiatrist's own words, he strongly disagrees that Philip ended his own life. According to him, Philip was prescribed these 2 drugs at the time of his death, which could result in suicidal tendencies, but neither of those drugs were found in his system during the autopsy, which means at some point well before his death, he stopped taking them. He mentioned that Philip was responding really well to treatment, and he never showcased any suicidal ideations. He was very much looking forward to the next chapter of his life after retirement. One thing that is really odd though is that 6 months before Philip's death, he told his psychiatrist about a disturbing nightmare he had. In the nightmare, he was in his car which went out of control on the way to work, and great violence was done to him. Because authorities wouldn't investigate deeper, Tracy hired a private investigator to look into Philip's case. During his investigation, the PI found that the lead investigator on the case didn't even preserve the scene of the crash or Philip's vehicle. And after interviewing him, the lead investigator on the case stated that despite the mutilations to Philip's body, quote, the situation wasn't handled as if it had been a crime scene. I am guilty. I was in charge of the investigation. There is a lot of fault to go around, but in the end, it's mine. Evidence may have been lost, leads may have been ignored. There was no investigation. End quote. The PI also found and interviewed the 2 witnesses that saw Philip crash that morning. According to them, they were never even contacted by Air Force investigators. Because of all of his findings, the PI strongly believes that Philip was murdered. Following Tracy's lawsuit, in June of 2008, Nancy received $1 million and Tracy ended up receiving $1.8 million. During the trial for that, the judge did something that made Tracy's jaw drop. He announced to the courtroom that based on the evidence considered by the court, Colonel Philip Michael Shue was murdered, therefore finding that his April 16, 2003 death was actually a homicide. Finally, after all of these years, someone with power agreed that all of the evidence points to him being murdered. So you would think that that would be a good thing, but unfortunately it wasn't. Despite the judge's order to reopen the case and change Philip's death certificate from suicide to homicide, Kendall County officials refused to do so. Kendall County officials have publicly stated that they have no plans to reinvestigate this case. And sadly, in 2009, the Texas Attorney General officially ruled that Philip's death certificate does not have to be changed. And to this day, Philip's official cause of death remains suicide. So even though you have all of these people saying that Philip's death was not a suicide, authorities have chosen to not reinvestigate Philip's death. This has left many people wondering what really happened to Colonel Philip Michael Shue and why it seems like it's being covered up. Law enforcement has never named Nancy, or anyone for that matter, as a suspect or person of interest in this case. Some believe that Philip staged the attack and just accidentally killed himself, but others believe that he was abducted, taken to a second location, tortured, and died while trying to get away. It's now been 22 years, and although what exactly happened to Philip that day remains a mystery, I think we can all agree that it was sinister.
What do we know about pregnant women? They are significantly more likely to be murdered than non-pregnant women. That alone is horrifying. And when this pregnant woman went missing, her sisters had to take the investigation into their own hands. Unfortunately, what they found would haunt them forever. It was the 9th of February 2014 in the beautiful area of Haiku in Hawaii. Now, Charlie Scott was 27 years old and was 5 months pregnant. Everyone who knew her said that she was just the most bubbly girl. She was always kind to people. She made sure she took care of everybody. She was literally the girl that you would go to if you needed a hug. She literally and metaphorically always welcomed people in with open arms. She really made everyone feel comfortable, even if she didn't know you very well. She'd been dating a 24-year-old man called Stephen Capobianco. The pair had actually broken up despite the fact that he was the father to her unborn child. The two of them didn't really see eye to eye on the plans for the pair moving forward. They disagreed over the pregnancy, and he'd actually tried to convince her to get rid of their child. She really wanted to be a mum though, and she was kind of just like, okay, well, I'll do this on my own if you're not going to be there to support me. Stephen was the last person to see Charlie on the day in question. He had given her a ring the night of the 9th and asked her for help due to his car going into a ditch. Now, as I said, the pair had broken up, but she still loved Stephen. Deep down, she really hoped the pair could reunite and figure things out for the sake of their child. She really wanted like a perfect, happy family unit that she imagined in her head. But shortly after this, she vanished. It was Charlie's family who ended up becoming worried the following day after not being able to get hold of her. Knowing she was pregnant and potentially in danger or injured somewhere, they reported her missing. Now, the police questioned Stephen, and he told them that Charlie had helped him with the car when he rang them, and then the pair went their separate ways. He said he had no clue where she'd gone after that. He said he drove off and she was behind him and he could kind of see her in the rearview mirror, and then she just disappeared. On February February the 11th, there was still no sign of the mother-to-be, and her sisters, in kind of desperation and just with a lot of anxious energy, felt like they needed to take action. I really can't blame them for this. I feel like if this was my sister, I would definitely be like, okay, I'm getting in the car and I'm gonna go and look. After scouring the area for potential clues, they unfortunately found nothing, but it was when they headed home that they bumped into Stephen on a dirt road. Suspiciously, he kind of tried to deter Charlie's sisters from looking in the area he'd just been in. He said, "Don't worry, I've already looked, I didn't find anything, it's not necessary for you to look here." The following evening, Charlie's friends made a worrying discovery. They found her car in a field and it had been set on fire. They obviously reported this to police and things just weren't looking good. On the 13th of February, another horrendous find. Charlie's sister came across some of Charlie's blood-stained clothing in a remote area, and guess which area this was? It was just off that road that Stephen had previously said he already searched. Now this obviously led to a huge police search in that area, and tragically a jawbone was found. After being sent off for testing, it was confirmed to be Charlie's, and suddenly police had a homicide investigation on their hands. Stephen was arrested for murder and arson in July. Friends and family of Charlie were questioned and they revealed some real red flags in the pair's relationship. Prior to their breakup, they lived together for 2 years, but Stephen apparently was really shady about the relationship. He hid it from people. Multiple times he'd claimed that the pair were just roommates, and he seemed to kind of not want to take photos with her and not really make it public that they were together. Ultimately, prosecutors would claim that Charlie continuing through the pregnancy was Stephen's motive. They stated he didn't want a child nor to be tied to Charlie. Thankfully, in 2016, Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I don't think that there's ever been a story that makes me believe in the afterlife as much as this one. And although it's comforting, it's also really disturbing. So let's talk about it. On September 12th, 2008 at 4:22 p.m., a Metrolink commuter train collided head-on with a freight train in the Chatsworth neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. The commuter train was carrying 225 passengers while the freight train was carrying 3, and they hit each other going 83 miles per hour combined. This obviously caused mass casualties, with 25 people dying and 135 others really badly injured. Among the deceased was 49-year-old Charles Peck, who was a customer service agent for Delta Airlines at the Salt Lake City International Airport. Charles was in California for a job interview at a different airport, and this was really exciting to him because this would have been a promotion. And at the time, he was saving up everything he could so that he could marry his fiancée, who lived in California. The two planned to wait to get married until they both lived in the same state. So this job interview meant everything to Charles. So that day, Charles got onto the train and was on his way to his fiancée's house in Westlake Village when the trains crashed into each other. He was sitting in the first passenger car when the crash happened, right at the point of impact, and he died immediately. This happened so suddenly that Charles didn't even know what was happening, and he likely didn't even see it coming. Charles' fiancée was on her way to the train station to pick him up when she heard the breaking news about the crash on the radio. She was with his parents and siblings who also lived in California, so as you can imagine, this was absolutely devastating. Charles' body wouldn't be pulled from the wreckage for another 12 hours, along with many others, but for the first 11 hours of that, his phone kept repeatedly calling his loved ones. In total, his phone called his loved ones 35 times, and it was everyone he loved most. So his sons, who he had from a previous marriage, his siblings, his stepmom, and his fiancé. Every time they answered the phone calls, no one would speak. They could only hear static. And when they would hang up and call back, their calls to him would go straight to voicemail. At this point in time, nobody, not even search and rescue, knew that he had already perished. And with all of these phone calls, his family really thought that he was still alive and just trapped somewhere in the wreckage. So his sons kept telling him when they received his phone calls that they loved him and told him to just hang on because people were coming to get him. Hours and hours would go by, and the day would bleed into nighttime as they waited for any news about Charles. And at 3:28 a.m., the calls officially stopped. His family gave this information to search and rescue, and they were able to pinpoint Charles' exact location through his phone, which led them to the first passenger car. As they combed through what was left of it, they finally found his body, 1 hour after the calls from his phone stopped and 12 hours after the accident. What's crazy is the fact that despite his phone calling his loved ones 35 times, authorities never found it, even though the calls are what ultimately led them to his remains. That's so scary to think about, that even though they traced his phone directly back to him, they still didn't find it. An autopsy confirmed that Charles died on impact, and his body showed no signs that he lived for even a short time after the crash. After an investigation, this crash, which became known as the Chatsworth crash, was found to be caused by a phone, which is really eerie to me as well. It was found that the engineer running the Metrolink commuter train had failed to stop at a red light. This forced the train onto a single track, and coming the opposite way was a Union Pacific freight train who had the right of way, and as a result, they crashed directly into each other. The engineer running the Metrolink commuter train had been texting while on duty. He was texting from the time he left the train station to just moments before the collision, 22 seconds to be exact, and it's crazy that this whole story revolves around a phone in some way. Charles' family believes that the phone calls were a message from Charles himself, letting them know that he's okay and that he didn't suffer. But it's now been 17 years, and whatever caused his phone to send all of those calls after his death remains a mystery.
I'm worried that she may be handing out our address. I worry that I'll come home from work one day to find both my children odd and murdered. This is the chilling letter that Esther Jai sent her daughter's social worker before her killing. Brianna Jai was gorgeous. She was flamboyant and fashionable and loved posting TikToks to thousands of followers online. But behind the scenes, she struggled. She had anxiety and sometimes battled with confidence issues behind closed doors. Brianna was born as Brett but transitioned when she was 14 and finally felt like she was free to be her true self. The family lived in Culcheth in Warrington, and Brianna seemed like the typical teenager. Sometimes she argued with her parents about what was best for her, like I feel like we all did when we were kids. Now, she'd been in quite a lot of trouble at school with things like failing to comply with the uniform policy and being on her phone, and she ended up getting excluded. Brianna's mum had expressed concerns multiple occasions to her social worker, and she really wanted to kind of bridge this gap that there seemed to have formed between them. On the 11th of February 2023, Brianna actually texted her mum to say that she was off to meet a friend called Scarlett, and her mum was really happy about this. She'd really been wanting her to battle through her anxiety, get out the house and start socialising again. Brianna, despite her anxiety, had bravely taken the bus to meet this friend, and when she told her mum, one of the last things her mum said to her was that she was proud of her. At 3 p.m, her mum got back home and then went on a dog walk over the local field, but she noticed that there was just loads of police everywhere, and she felt a bit worried about this and intimidated, so she cut her walk short. However, upon returning home, she noticed that there were police there too. They'd found a body and they believed it to be Brianna. Now, there is so much more to this story. I've actually read Brianna's mum's book. It's really good, but it's obviously heartbreaking, and I go into loads more detail on my episode about this case on the Born Investigation podcast. Essentially, 2 dog walkers made the call to emergency services after spotting a male and a female bending down to what they thought at the time would have been a dog or a doll. And when they got closer, they realised this was a body, and the male and the female ran off. When police got to the scene, they found Brianna lay face down with her white fluffy jacket covered in blood. A post-mortem confirmed that this was a murder. She'd been stabbed 28 times. Brianna's mum told officers about this Scarlett that she was due to meet, and officers ended up determining that this was Scarlett Jenkinson. She was a 15-year-old who'd recently moved to the same school as Brianna. Tips also came in to identify the male seen at the scene. This was 15-year-old Eddie Ratcliffe. The pair were in regular communication on social media online, and it almost seemed like Scarlett was kind of coaching Eddie through life. It was a very strange relationship, almost like brother-sister. Although Eddie knew Scarlett for years, he had no connection to Brianna. He had no reason to want to hurt her. The connection was Scarlett. Then police received a phone call that they were not expecting. It was Scarlett Jenkinson's mum. She handed the phone over to Scarlett, and Scarlett admitted that the 3 of them had been together the day that Brianna was killed. She claimed, though, that Brianna had gone off to meet a 17-year-old from Manchester after spending some time with them. Police did actually arrest both Eddie and Scarlett despite this and searched their houses. A knife and clothes were seized and sent for analysis. Both suspects ended up kind of trying to blame each other, despite this first kind of lie that Scarlett had concocted about this Manchester guy. Evidence was mounting against them, and texts between the pair were absolutely horrific, and as I said on my podcast episode, I go into loads of detail about these texts, but I actually can't read them out on this app for obvious reasons. The text showed a really calculated and meticulously planned attack. And Brianna wasn't the only target. There were other people named in a kill list between the pair. Scarlett had a shockingly disturbing search history, and it even transpired that she'd tried to kill Brianna before by giving her something to drink. Luckily, Brianna threw up and was unharmed at that point. But there was also a sickening letter discovered by police in which Scarlett had planned the entire killing out. Chillingly, in order to try and cover her tracks, Scarlett had texted Brianna, knowing full well she was murdered. I mean, she was the one who murdered her. But these texts asked if she was okay and why she went off with a guy from Manchester. I mean, police could see right through this. She'd also sickeningly posted a photo of Brianna calling her the best person she ever met and said how sickening it was what had happened to her, all the time knowing full well that it was her to blame. Now, Eddie and Scarlett both pleaded not guilty, but were thankfully found guilty of murder and were given between 20 and 22 years in prison. As I said, for a deep dive into this case, check out the Born Investigation podcast.
The murder of influencer Alexis Sharkey. Alexis is obviously very beautiful, but she was also very sweet and smart, just a total package. Grew up in Pennsylvania, she was always the top of her class, graduated with honors always. She had plans to go to med school, but she wanted to have a little bit of adventure first. She was this huge free spirit, so she made a big move to Texas. She was working at a restaurant, and there she started dating one of the regulars named Tom Sharkey. The two had an instant connection. They really hit it off. Tom was already divorced and he had 2 children from that previous marriage. He was actually quite older than Alexis. It was a pretty big age gap. He was actually 23 years older than Alexis, and his daughter was about Alexis's age. That really didn't seem to bother either of them. Alexis became a Monet seller, which is an MLM. If you don't know what an MLM is, I'm sure someone in the comments will tell you all about it. It's pretty much a pyramid scheme. People at the top make a lot of money and people at the bottom lose money, but Alexis did really good at this. She was making quite a bit of money. Some people say that she was making like $30,000 a month doing this. So she's making quite a bit of money, and her and Tom did a lot of traveling, which of course they also would vlog for YouTube. Alexis grew a pretty vast and successful social media presence, especially doing the MLM. She had like quite a bit of followers through all different social media platforms. Alexis's phone was like her office. Coming from someone who does social media, I'm on my phone a lot, but Alexis was even more consistent than I could ever dream to be. She would be on her phone posting every couple hours, like literally on her phone 24/7. She would be posting on her story like at least every 2 hours. Tom and Alexis got engaged and then married 2 months later. They moved a few times, but you know, things were looking pretty good by 2020 for the couple. 2020, Alexis was 26 years old and Tom was 49. Alexis could make friends anywhere she went, and she made this really big group of close girlfriends that did like everything together. They were very close. And in November of 2020, on Thanksgiving, Alexis spent Thanksgiving with this group of girlfriends and not with her husband, Tom. She actually didn't end up going home until like way past 3 a.m. And the day after Thanksgiving is of course Black Friday. Alexis is an influencer. She's a Monet seller, an MLM seller. And on Black Friday, pretty much every other MLM seller woke up bright and early to post their Black Friday deals, but Alexis didn't. Alexis actually didn't post at all on social media on Black Friday, which is very odd for a girl who used to post every 2 hours at least. The day after that, Alexis and her friends had plans, but Alexis never showed up, and it was then that pretty much everyone realized that no one had heard or seen from Alexis, and it was actually Alexis's friends to report Alexis missing and not her husband, Tom. And when questioned by police about the last time Tom saw his wife, Tom changed his story over and over and over and over again, which is not a good sign. Not long later, tragically, the body of Alexis was found only a few miles from the apartment she shared with her husband, Tom. It was just on the side of the road, like she was trash or something. She wasn't wearing any clothes, and at first they actually couldn't determine her cause of death because there weren't any wounds or like apparent trauma to her body. But Alexis's friends were definitely pointing fingers at Tom. They thought Tom did something to Alexis because apparently Alexis had confided in all of her friends that she was unhappy in her marriage, that it was a bad marriage, that she had plans to divorce Tom. She actually had the divorce papers all ready. They just needed to be signed. And Alexis even told one of her friends that she was scared for her life. Eventually, Alexis's cause of death was determined to be strangulation, so her death was officially ruled and being investigated as a homicide, and afterwards, Tom just stopped investigating with the police, and only 2 weeks after his wife's death was ruled as a homicide, Tom fled the state without telling anyone where he went. And it actually took a while for them to find Tom, but when they did track him down, they were like, hey buddy, we still have questions for you about your wife's murder, so we need to meet up with you. We need to make plans to meet up because we need to talk, and we also want to get a DNA sample from you. And Tom, to the police's faces, was very cooperative, very nice, very helpful. He said, of course, we'll meet up, but he never showed up for that appointment because Tom fled the state again. He fled to Florida where his daughter lived. Police tracked Tom down to his daughter's house in Florida on October 6, 2021, this time with an arrest warrant. But like the piece of shit coward that he is, Tom Sharkey unalived himself in his daughter's home before the police could arrest him. He did that in his own daughter's house. And because of his own cowardness, Alexis will never get justice. She'll never get her day in court, and her loved ones will never get closure or answers about why Alexis had to lose her life. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. If you're wondering why my background's different, this is not permanent, this is temporary. It'll only be different like this for a week. My mom's a traveling nurse. I haven't seen her in like a year, so I'm visiting my mom right now. So I'll be like this for a week. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. Love you so much.